There once was a time when Superman died in the comics, and when the writers of that story went and met with Jerry Siegel, the man who created the Superman character, they were a little bit nervous, because they thought he might be angry at them since they killed off the very character that he was famous for creating. Much to their surprise, he was not angry at all. In fact, he congratulated them on making such a bold decision, and he said that as a writer, he understands that when you're working with a character that has been around for so long, you have to shake things up from time to time in order to keep things fresh and new. Regardless of where you sit on Man of Steel, there is no doubt that it certainly did shake things up. But did it shake things up in a good way or a bad way? Well, that is what we're here to find out. Now, this is an extensive covering of all of the criticism for this movie for your convenience. I've put a little annotation and a timestamp in the corner here, so if you're getting bored, you can just hit that and go right to the next topic. Now, many people try to say that proof this movie sucked is the Rotten Tomatoes score that Man of Steel got, compared to some of the other movies that got higher scores. I mean, just look at them. Superman Returns, Crystal Skull, even The Phantom Menace got a higher score than Man of Steel. Are you kidding me?
This is blasphemy. This is madness. Madness. This is
Rotten Tomatoes. Clearly, this is a case where democracy has just become mob rule, with everyone just jumping on the hate bandwagon. Other people try to say this movie was a failure because it didn't make Dark Knight Rises kind of money. And that's why they're bringing in Batman into the next movie to boost Superman's numbers. That doesn't even make any sense. Of course it didn't make Dark Knight Rises kind of money. That was the final of a trilogy. They always make more money. How else do you explain X-Men 3's profits? A much more accurate comparison would be to Batman Begins, as that was the first of the Nolan trilogy, as Man of Steel is the first of this series of movies. And Man of Steel made $300 million more than Batman Begins. Almost double of what that movie made, and it's still climbing. So if anything, Superman is actually helping Batman out at the box office, not the other way around. Look, I'm just going to say it. I saw this movie 5 times in cinemas, and I really loved it. It was one of the most exciting moments in my life as a Superman fan. I've been waiting so long for a Superman movie where he can finally just be set free and cut loose like I've always wanted to see him do.
I finally got to go and see Man of Steel. Superman. I didn't like it, guys. I bloody loved it!
And I was just so happy to see Superman back again that I didn't care about plot holes or nitpicking why Lois Lane was inside ship or any of that stuff. Now, many of you might be thinking that this immediately makes me biased. However, that's not exactly the case, because as a result of me seeing this movie so many times and knowing it inside out and back to front, I know of plot holes that nobody else knows of. Especially one plot hole in particular that is so huge, so massive, so all-encompassing that it is actually a movie-breaking flaw that in one shot annihilates the whole movie, and so far no one has ever noticed before. And in the interest of being unbiased, I'm going to share it with you in this video. But hey, I still love the movie nonetheless, which is why ultimately I know that I'm not going to change anyone's minds about this movie. If you hated it, I'm not going to make you start liking it any more than you can make me start hating it. So that's not my goal in doing this video. My goal in this video is I want to prove that Man of Steel is not a badly made movie. I am sick and tired of people saying it's a bad movie just because it doesn't go with their personal tastes, and then them trying to say that it's badly written or whatever. It's not badly written, it's just written differently than you're used to in a Superman movie. Personally, I hate Chinese food. I don't like it. I can't stand it. I do everything I can to try and avoid it. So does that mean that the Chinese food is badly cooked? Hell no. I'm sure it's prepared wonderfully. It's just not appealing to me because it's not in my taste. And a lot of Man of Steel haters are saying that they couldn't stomach this movie because it was badly cooked. I want to prove that that's not true. Man of Steel is a meal that was thoughtfully prepared, beautifully cooked, and served with a lot of passion and care. But just perhaps not to everyone's tastes. So to prove this point, I'm going to go through all of the major criticisms that people have made about this movie, and in discussing them, we're going to slot each argument into either one of 3 categories: lack of insight, personal taste, or legitimate. So by the end of this, we can count them all up and we can see if this movie can truly be called a bad movie. Yep, it is super nerd nitpicking taken out to the extreme. But hopefully we should have a bit of fun along the way. Additionally, when I do come across a legitimate plot hole or flaw, instead of just pointing at them and screaming that the movie sucks, like a lot of the Man of Steel haters do, I'm actually going to offer ways that these could have been fixed up in the movie in my own humble little effort to try and help make future DC movies a little bit better. So now that all that boring red tape stuff is out of the way, we can let the trial commence. I present to you Exhibit A. Krypton sucks! It looks like an Avatar ripoff, the technology is stupid, and the Jedi Council are idiots that refuse to evacuate a dying planet. Okay, first of all, this doesn't look anything like Avatar. That world was a psychedelic acid trip through an alien jungle. This is a desert planet that looks like something that could actually exist, rather than the cartoony Pixar environment of Pandora. And the technology in this is something that truly looks alien. The technology on Krypton is more tactile, from the display on the robot Helix to the weird cryotube things. Everything is formed from a physical substance as opposed to a giant plasma screen TV like you would see in other movies. And the interface with this technology is something uniquely different. The technology seems to be linked to their own minds. They can issue a command by just thinking it. Now that is true alien technology. As for the argument that the Jedi Council are all idiots because they were too stupid to evacuate a dying planet, yes! That's the whole point. They are idiots. That's how the planet got into this jam in the first place. This is how genetic engineering brought down Kryptonian society. With everyone designed to perform a single purpose, they lost the ability to adapt and change to these new circumstances that they were facing. This is a theme that I wish the movie would have focused more on, as it would have been a really powerful message for today, because our world is in a very similar situation now, where we're at the tipping point environmentally, and for our world to survive, we need to change the way that we live, or we can just be like the Kryptonians and refuse to change. In fact, the inability to change seems to be the Achilles heel of all the Kryptonians. Superman's willingness to adapt and embrace a new life on a new world is what makes him different, and the reason why he is the only survivor that really flourishes. It's a shame then that this theme kind of gets pushed aside for the whole how will the world react to a superpowered being thing. I think the former had much more weight to it. But getting back to the criticism, why didn't they evacuate the planet? They evidently didn't have the interstellar ships that they needed.
The outposts and space exploration were abandoned.
Hence why JorEl had to build Superman's baby shuttle himself in secret in his own house. You know, just like it happened in every other version of Superman's origin story. And you're only just complaining about that now? It's been told that way for over 70 years. The only other ship the Kryptonians have that can travel through space is the prison ship, which JorEl also designed. So could they have evacuated the whole planet in that? Yeah, probably not. I don't think so. But a solid complaint people have is how JorEl is such a great fighter when he was bred to be a scientist. They could have fixed this up by having JorEl have a couple of gadgets built into his suit to help him to take out some of those henchmen, so that he's using his brains as a scientist to give him the edge, rather than suddenly transforming into Rambo for no reason. Like, have it that when he's being taken away, he could have some panels built into his suit's wrists that are kind of like tasers that he can zap the 2 guys on either side of him, so he can escape. Then when he's in the house, he flips a switch activating all these magnet thingies in the hallway, snatching all the guns out of their hands and making them stick to the roof. Then he shoots all the henchmen that are trying to pry their guns off the wall, and Zod charges at him. They tussle for a little bit. JorEl's fighting hard, but Zod is kind of just toying with him. Then he beats him down to the ground, and while he's lying there near Zod's feet, he grabs at Zod's ankle with the taser thing, taking him down. Again, using his brain to defeat Zod, rather than muscle power. So yes, the fighting skill of JorEl, that is a legitimate criticism. Exhibit B. General Zod sucks! He has stupid bug eyes, he's over the top and dull at the same time. Shut up! General Zod is awesome. I love this guy so much I have him as my ringtone.
I will fight him! I will fight him! I will fight him! I will fight him!
I find it soothing. But General Zod has always been a crazy lunatic character. I wouldn't mind betting that Michael Shannon played up those over-the-top moments on purpose as a tribute to the Terrence Stamp version. Yet his version still does feel like a dangerous villain at the same time. He does a wonderful job, not only of being the bad guy, but because you can really see the pain and desperation in his character that has lost his world, lost his people, and lost his reason for existing, and is just clinging to that last hope to save his people, and when it's snatched away, he completely snaps, and he basically uses Superman to commit suicide. This version is infinitely more layered, deep, and interesting than any portrayal of Zod that we've ever seen before. Yeah, but he stupidly tries to take over a dying planet, he chose to terraform Earth when he could have just picked a different planet, and if he does turn Earth into Krypton, they'll lose all of their superpowers. Well, yeah. His plan certainly did have a few holes in it. But he took over Krypton in an effort to save it because, as we've discussed, the Council weren't going to do anything. We don't know what his plans were going to be after he seized power, but it seems pretty obvious that he wanted to work alongside JorEl to find a solution. So he was obviously aware of the danger that the planet was in, and was trying to combat it. The one thing he and JorEl had in common is that they were not in denial about the fate of the planet. As for him picking Earth when he could have just gone to any other planet that would have done and terraformed that, and the terraforming process removing all of their powers on Earth, those are legitimate plot holes. And it's frustrating because both of those issues could have been fixed with just one simple tweak. Zod, you can colonize any planet out there, but not every planet has the unique atmosphere and yellow sun of this planet that gives you all of your abilities. So the very reason that they want Earth is because it will give them powers. Follow that up with having the scientist guy saying, we are going to alter Earth's atmosphere just enough to kill all of the humans while still giving us our abilities. Problem solved. But I do think that a lot of these issues with Zod and his plans is due to something that seems to happen a lot in Zack Snyder movies. And that is, he just doesn't think he needs to explain certain things. And I don't believe this is due to any negligence or incompetence on his part, but rather just because of his huge enthusiasm for what he's doing. He gets so carried away that he doesn't realize the audience is not going to understand certain things. Take Watchmen, for example. If you haven't read the graphic novel, you're going to be lost watching that, because Snyder just doesn't explain things. Even something as simple as when Dr. Manhattan teleports to Mars. There's nothing to tell you that he's on Mars. You're just somehow supposed to know that that's where he is. This is why I'm such a big fan of James Cameron's pre-Titanic career, because even though he did these massive action movies, he still paid attention to the little things. In Aliens, when Ripley goes to get Newt, it shows that she's dropping flares along the way so that she can find her way back to the elevator again. And the Queen Alien doesn't just magically appear on the bottom of the shuttle, they make a point of showing the ship got pushed sideways by an explosion into the platform, giving the Queen a chance to grab on. If Zack Snyder had filmed this, he probably would have just had the Queen appear on the shuttle, seemingly out of nowhere. I think Snyder really needed a fresh set of eyes to look over anything, just to let him know when he needs to add in a line or two just to connect the dots for the audience. The bringing of Lois Lane up to Zod's ship is a prime example of this problem in Zack Snyder's movies. There is a reason for this given in the movie, it's just not really pointed to. It was so that Zod could use the Dream Machine to get any information out of Lois that he couldn't get from Clark, such as where the Kent farm is. That's how he knew to go looking for the Codex there.
I didn't want to tell them anything about you, but they did something to me. They looked inside my mind.
Okay.
But again, it's not clearly communicated. We're just supposed to make that connection on our own.
But I've got to say one thing. I think Zack Snyder did that to try and keep the bloody critics happy. He cut a lot of this movie down. He really has cut some of this movie, because there was certain scenes in this movie where I felt that there was something missing. There was just something missing in certain scenes within this movie. And I think Zack Snyder had cut that movie down because he obviously didn't want to keep it too long, to keep all those pansy-ass critics out there, those so-called critics, happy. But clearly they still weren't happy.
Before this movie came out, I did express this concern in a different video I did, but I figured that Christopher Nolan's influence as producer would be one of the things that would fill this role and patch up some of these holes that Snyder can't see. But it seems pretty clear now that Nolan wasn't involved as much as we thought that he would be, and besides, Nolan does exactly the same thing in his movies. How did Batman get back into Gotham after the city was completely locked down and he has no money or use of any of his back gear? I don't know, because he's Batman. But like I said, I don't think Snyder does this this because of any incompetence on his part. It's just because he fanboys out so much, he overlooks a lot of this stuff. But I would rather have a movie that misses the mark due to too much enthusiasm than one that misses the mark due to the makers of it just not caring. But who knows, in a bizarre twist of fate, maybe Ben Affleck will come along and become that influence on Snyder that I was hoping Nolan would be, and he could be the one to fix up these issues in the future. Exhibit C. Jonathan Kent is a jerk because he punishes Clark for saving all of the kids on the bus.
What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?
Maybe.
Hey, he doesn't say let them die. He says maybe let them die.
That's much better?
Well, it's his way of saying he doesn't know. And that's what's so great about it, because it mimics real life far more than previous Superman films. It shows that people don't always have the answer.
Exactly. Clark here is what, 12 years old? All Jonathan Kent knows for sure is that it's too early for his son to be revealed to the world. He's too young. He's not ready to handle the intense scrutiny that he will be under once his existence is known. As well as that, Jonathan Kent doesn't just have to try and figure out when his son is ready to face the world, he also has to try and figure out when the world is ready to face him. How his son acts could have huge ramifications on the whole world, and he has to think about that. He has to weigh up the welfare of his son, the welfare of the world, and the lives of all those kids in the bus, and decide which one is worth sacrificing at the expense of the others. How can anybody make a decision like that? You can't. Well, Jonathan Kent has to, whether he likes it or not, and when put in that situation, the only thing he can be certain of is that it's too soon for his son to be revealed, and that's what he says here. But he doesn't teach Clark about responsibility or morality or anything. Oh, really? Then tell me, when this guy tips a beer over his head, why doesn't he rip his arms and legs off and leave him as a twitching torso on the ground? Huh? Why? Why doesn't he do that? Because that's not how he was raised. Right? So I guess Jonathan Kent did teach him something. The only reason Jonathan Kent has issues with him using his powers as a kid is because he's too young to handle the pressure of the world scrutinizing him. But the very fact that Superman even cares enough to save people at all proves that he was raised right. To illustrate this, let's do a tally of all the people that Superman saves, because a lot of people try to say that he doesn't save anyone in the movie. Obviously, he did save the whole world by destroying the world engine, but usually when people say this, they're referring to the more intimate, personalized saving of people that we know from the old films. So let's see how many people Superman saves personally in comparison to the original movie, since most people consider that to be the best one. However, since it can be tricky to define exactly what counts as a personal save as opposed to an impersonal save, like when he stops the train from derailing, is that a personal save for each individual on the train? Well, if it is, then why can't we count Superman punching the world engine as a personal save for everybody on Earth? So the rule that we're going to be using is, for a save to count, we need to actually see the person that he's rescuing. Let's do it.
Easy, miss.
Superman saves almost 4 times as many people in Man of Steel as he did in the original Superman, by his direct actions. And if we count indirect actions, saving people that we never see, Man of Steel still comes out on top because he saved the whole world. In no other movie has Superman saved every single living thing on Earth in such a definitive, concrete way. So by this simple tally, we see that not only did Jonathan Kent raise a good kid, he raised a hero. He raised the greatest hero the world has ever known. So if you still want to say that Jonathan Kent didn't teach him anything, then let me quote the English guy from Pacific Rim. Numbers don't lie. Politics, poetry, promises may lie, but numbers don't lie. Yeah, but Jonathan Kent stepped into a hurricane for no reason. You know, almost everything that people find fault with throughout this entire sequence is based off their failure to recognize one key element. Clark is supposed to be a teenager. Now, I say almost everything people find fault with because they used Henry Cavill to play this part of a teenage Clark. So I think a lot of people just didn't realize that Clark was supposed to be a teenager because Henry Cavill clearly doesn't look that age. I suspect that since Henry Cavill was playing the adult Clark and they had Dylan Sprayberry to play the 12-year-old Clark, they had to decide whether to pick a new actor to play this Clark or to just have Henry Cavill trying to act younger. And they obviously went with the latter. Probably because having a new actor for only one flashback would be too disorienting, and they wanted Henry Cavill's acting skills to sell the emotional moment. But as a result, people just assumed that Clark was in his mid-20s, and that undermined everything that the scene is about. But just imagine for a moment that instead of Henry Cavill, they decided to use Sprayberry again. Think of it. Everything else in that scene happens exactly the same, except that it's a younger actor playing Clark. Now, everything in that scene makes a lot more sense. From the argument in the car, to why Jonathan Kent would go back himself to get the dog rather than sending Clark to do it, to him stopping Clark from saving him. Because even though a 12-year-old Clark probably could save his father, maybe he couldn't. And even if he could, he's still too young to be exposed to the world. At 16, 17 years of age, all of us think that we're ready to be adults when we really aren't. We've all had that similar conversation with our parents that Clark had with his father in the car. Only with Clark, it's a much bigger deal because he's a superpowered being. And no doubt every adopted kid has said to their stepdad at some point or another, "You're not my dad." The problem is Henry Cavill saying those lines makes him seem like a whining brat, and Henry Cavill being told to stop by Jonathan Kent makes Jonathan Kent's sacrifice seem unnecessary. Perhaps the first thing they should have filmed is all the 12-year-old Clark scenes with Sprayberry, and then the very last thing they filmed at the end of the 3-year production of the movie is the Cyclone sequence with a now 15-year-old Sprayberry. So while there is an explanation for everything that happened in this sequence, ultimately, since they failed to get that message across to the audience, we have to shelve this one as a legitimate criticism, and it pains me to do that. Exhibit D. The Codex of Nothingness. Alright, this is it. This is where we're going to address the movie-breaking plot hole. That is the elephant in the room that none of us have noticed until now. The single biggest element of the plot is the Codex. The fate of all of Krypton, its survival or extinction, everything is dependent on the Codex. It is the key to everything. Hell, it's the key and the lock. It's the entire doorway. And without it, all hope is snuffed out in a millisecond.
Give me control of the Codex.
Where is the Codex, Cavill?
The thing is, they don't really need the Codex. Why? Yep. You got it. The one thing that everyone seems to be overlooking is that even though everyone in the movie is droning on and on about the Codex, the Kryptonians are still fully capable of good old-fashioned reproduction.
Heresy!
Even JorEl, the man responsible for the first natural birth in centuries, is still focused on the Codex. You know, what better way for him to bring in freedom of choice than to promote old-fashioned reproduction again?
Heresy!
But it never seems to occur to him.
Heresy!
Yes, I know. The Kryptonians prefer to have their babies conceived and grown in sterile laboratories. And I'm gonna try and be as polite and tactful as I can be here, because I try to keep this channel a bit cleaner. But seriously, Zod, your planet blew up. Your people are on the brink of extinction. And you did say you were willing to do anything to save your people, right? You were willing to genocide an entire planet of people but you're not willing to, how should I put this? Have a one-on-one training session with Feora? You could do a lot worse, dude. When you think about it, the Kryptonians are basically like panda bears. Even though they're on the endangered species list, they refuse to mate to save the species. Zod is literally a guy who, if given a choice between genociding an entire planet or spending the night with a lovely lady, he would rather genocide the planet. Maybe that's why he's so angry all the time. The Kryptonians need some serious hippie re-education. Perhaps that's the lesson we can learn from Krypton. If you ban sex, the planet will explode. So, point being, the number one most precious and valuable thing in the whole movie, in the end, really wasn't important at all, or even needed for that matter. And that's why this is the biggest plot hole in the entire movie. But on the flip side, it does show that when Superman destroyed the scout ship, he wasn't sacrificing the future of Krypton to save Earth. Really, all he was doing was putting an end to the genetic manipulation that brought about the destruction of Krypton in the first place. Exhibit E. Battle Fatigue. This section is going to cover everything from Metropolis being destroyed, the infamous neck snap, and the world engines themselves. Everything involved in the movie's finale. Before Man of Steel came out, the biggest complaint that the Superman haters had about Superman was, he's so powerful that it's not interesting because you know he's always going to be able to save everybody. It's boring. Then along came Man of Steel, where clearly he can't save everybody, and now those same people complain about that. There's no pleasing these people. It's just contradictory nonsense. It's just like that Monty Python skit.
You did not.
Yes, I did.
You did not.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
Yes, I did.
Didn't.
Yes, I did.
Look, this isn't an argument.
Look, if I argue with you, I must take up a contrary position.
But it isn't just saying no, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. Argument's an intellectual process. Contradiction is just the automatic gainsaying of anything the other person says.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
Not at all.
No, look.
Thank you.
If you compare the end of Man of Steel to the end of the Avengers, which, for the record, I saw 3 times in the movies because I really liked it, but you'll notice one key difference. While both have a major city being destroyed, in Avengers, not one single civilian is killed. Even when those giant lizard things are like crashing onto buildings and crushing them, nobody gets hurt. Now, obviously, since Marvel has a lighter, more comedic tone into their films, they didn't want to show innocent people getting slaughtered. It would make it hard for them to joke about eating chihuahua off the back of that. So it's understandable, but inevitably it strips away the danger element of the story and it becomes much less engaging. Because like the Superman films of old, you know no one's gonna die. Even Agent Coulson doesn't really die. But Man of Steel created a world where threats are real, where innocent people can die, and as hard as Superman might try, he can't save everyone. Now some people might see that as a negative, saying, I get enough reality in my real life, I go to the movies for an escape, but I, on the other hand, find it far more interesting to see an old school superhero put into a real world scenario and having to grapple with all of the complicated problems that come from that. And to quote Kevin Smith, we live in a post 9/11 world. To have a major disaster hit a big city without one single person dying, it's just not going to cut it anymore. Not unless the movie's more kind of cartoony like Marvel does it. And as for people heaping the blame onto Superman for all of the destruction of Metropolis, I've actually counted how many buildings got smashed due to Superman's action. And the result? 0. Every building that Superman goes through, he is thrown through by General Zod. The closest he comes is when he rakes Zod's face across the side of the building, and still, he's only breaking the glass. He's not smashing the building itself. It's actually the Smallville fight, where most of the destruction is Superman's fault, but ironically, people don't really complain about that fight. It's the end one that they really zero in on, and I believe the reason for this is all about tone. Back when Fight Club came out in the 90s, a lot of critics panned it for being an ultra-violent and sadistic film, when there was actually only about 5 or 6 fight scenes in the whole movie, when around the same time The Matrix came out, which is basically an endless series of fight scenes throughout the whole movie, but the difference was tone. The Matrix was a video game, people flying through the air, taking hits that would kill someone in real life, but still being okay. But Fight Club was about as real as you could get. It was gritty, in your face, place, and it accurately showed the consequences of violence. So even though it had less fight scenes than The Matrix, it seemed more violent because of how it was handled, because of the tone. A similar thing can be said for Man of Steel. And I think this is why a lot of reviewers have actually backed off from criticizing the destruction at the end of the movie, because they realize it's not something that's really wrong with a movie, it's just a very different tone than what we're used to in a Superman movie. But isn't that exactly what doing a reboot is all about? I would say that this final fight scene between Zod and Superman is the most realistic portrayal of what would happen if two of these beings actually did go up against each other in real life. It would be terrifying, and there'd be a huge amount of destruction caused. However, tone is one thing, but what about Superman himself, you know? Shouldn't Superman be like flying around during that destruction, catching people, putting out fires with his freeze breath, all that kind of stuff? No, he shouldn't. Because he needs to focus on taking out the world engine. If he doesn't do that, any individual he saves in Metropolis is going to be dead anyway. And by going for the one near the Indian Ocean on the other side of the world, while the military goes after the one in Metropolis, was perfect. Because that way, if one of them fails, the other one can still get the job done. You don't throw all your eggs in one basket, especially not when the fate of the world is at stake.
And that was another thing as well that really got me in awe, was the fact that people turned around and said, "Why didn't they save enough people in Metropolis? And where all these people die? All that destruction, it was too much destruction, I couldn't cope with it. It was just, Superman saves people. Why was he not saving these people?" If you actually watch the movie, he didn't even get a chance to breathe. Zod and bloody Fiora and all these henchmen were bloody wiping out the whole of bloody Metropolis with a big device that totally wipes, pretty much wiped all of Metropolis out. So he's not going to be able to save everybody. Right, I need to calm down. I seriously need to calm down.
However, I do think that the movie could have done more with this point. They could have made it that Zod specifically chose to set down right in the middle of Metropolis because he knew that Superman will want to protect people more than anything else. Hence, he'd have to choose between saving people in Metropolis or letting them die in order to go after the world engine. It's exactly the same kind of dilemma Superman faced at the end of the Christopher Reeve movie, where he had to let Lois Lane die so that he could stop the nuclear missiles. Only this time, he doesn't get to have his cake and eat it too by reversing time. He has to choose. And when they're planning all this, you could have had the Colonel guy pull Superman aside and sort of explain to him that he has to set his concerns for people aside in order to save them. Hence, laying the true blame for the destruction of Metropolis on Zod where it belongs. And right before the big final fight with Zod, just have that general guy walk up and say to Superman, "This is ground zero, we've evacuated 10 square blocks, just keep him within that radius." Then, Zyder is free to smash as many buildings as he wants. And it would also make sense as to why Superman would land Zod back in the same location again after they go up into space, because he knows that area has been evacuated. And come on, the city is already so wrecked by the time the fight starts. Does it really matter if a few more buildings go down? I don't think so. And now we have the infamous neck snap, which again, a lot of critics have backed off about. But who cares about those idiot critics? We're comic book fans, and we all know that Superman has never, ever killed in the comics, right? Well, except for this. And this. And possibly this. Although, apparently there is an extra scene in Superman 2 showing Zod being taken away to prison by the Arctic police, since they were depowered at that point. Even though you can find that scene on YouTube, and Zod doesn't appear in that scene. And guess what? If it's not in the finished movie, it doesn't count anyway. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Prometheus, with all your bonus scenes. So, even Christopher Reeve's Superman murdered Zod by throwing him down a bottomless pit of dry ice. So in reality, this is not something that we haven't seen done before, other than it being done with a different tone. And look, honestly, if someone is going to do the whole vigilante thing, eventually they're going to be faced with a situation that will require deadly force. And I hate it when superhero movies chicken out by manufacturing some ridiculous situation where an accident is what kills off the bad guy. Because the writers need to have the bad guy die, but they don't want the hero to get his hands bloodied. So they create this absurd scenario where there's an accidental death. That's cheating! and it's cowardly storytelling, and it really annoys me. Either have the guts to have your hero make that tough decision to take a life, or have him dealing with the repercussions of not taking the bad guy's life, that being that every crime the bad guy commits after that time is half on the hero's back. Man of Steel had the guts to have Superman make that choice rather than trying to fabricate some scenario where Zod accidentally kills himself. Good for them. I wish more movies followed their example rather than taking the easy way out of tricky moral situations. The only thing that annoys me more than this is the most common complaint from Superman haters that just keeps coming up again and again and again and again. And it is so annoying because it's not even true. People saying, the fight scenes are boring because Superman's invincible, so what's the point of even having them fight? Ugh. I'm going to try to stay calm. But I'm telling you, person making this complaint, you don't understand anything. Tell me, if Superman is invincible and he and Zod are the same, why is he bothering to block punches from Zod? Huh? Because clearly, he's not invincible. If you hit him hard enough, it will hurt him. It just takes a lot more to hurt him than it would you or I. It's like if a baby punched you in the face. You wouldn't care. It's not going to hurt. But if that baby grabs a baseball bat and then smashes it over your head, you are going to get hurt. And don't laugh, that is entirely possible. Of course you know Superman's not going to die. Just like you know that every other main character in every movie ever made is not going to die. When James Bond is on the crazy death contraption, do you actually think he's not going to make it out of there? No, you know he's going to escape. The excitement is in seeing how he overcomes those odds that are stacked up against him. And it's the same here with Superman. Yes, he has super strength, super speed, and he's bulletproof, but that doesn't make him invincible. It's just called being a superhero. Get it? And I think Superman has more weaknesses than any other comic book character that's at his power level. I mean, in Man of Steel, we saw him get dropped to his knees by the air. The air! But no, people just ignore all of that and go around saying that he's boring because he's invincible, even though all of the evidence shows that he's not. I just hope, for my own sanity's sake, that people will stop bringing up this idiotic complaint. Exhibit F. No character development. This is probably the most common criticism of the movie, that there's no character development and that we never get to really know Superman. Dude, it's Superman. He's one of the most recognizable and well-known characters ever created. Everyone knows him. Everyone knows who he is, knows what he's about. How much character development do you need for a character who everyone already knows? Have you seriously not heard of him before? Okay, let me explain it to you. He's the ultimate hero, he's the ultimate good guy, he loves his mum, and he doesn't use his X-ray vision to see through women's clothing. Everybody gets that. What's not to get? Do we really have to spend a whole movie establishing that? No, because we already know it. I'll ask again, how much character development do we need for a character that is already so well known? And those people who complain about lack of character development, in the same breath, complain that there's too many flashbacks. Well, what do you think the flashbacks are there for? To deliver the very character development that you're complaining there isn't enough of. And you're saying there's too much of it. Tell me, when you say you never got to know Superman properly, what exactly is it that you wanted that wasn't in the movie? Specifically, what did you want to see? Maybe a scene of him struggling with his powers as a boy? Boom! We got it. Perhaps a scene of him dealing with how different rules apply to him because he's superhuman? Boom! We got it. Or maybe his struggle for identity in that he's a child of two different worlds. Boom! Got that as well. You'll notice that nobody who makes this claim can ever specify what it was that they wanted to see other than some vague notion of just more characterization. And I say that's because we don't need any more. Truth be told, in rebooting the Superman franchise, they only had two options in this regard. To tell the story in a linear fashion, like we've already seen done before about 1,000 times, or start Superman's story with him as a man, with just a few flashbacks telling us the stuff that we need to know. And they very wisely went with that second option, because I can promise you, if they went the other direction and told a linear story, people would be so bored because we already know it. This criticism, like the majority of the rest, is not so much due to the movie itself, but rather people just not liking that it's something different than what they're used to. Which goes back to what I said in the beginning. This is not a bad movie, it's just a different taste to what a lot of people were used to. You know, comparing Henry Cavill's Superman to Christopher Reeve's Superman is a bit like comparing Christian Bale's Batman to Adam West's Batman. There's a massive gulf between them. One is campy, the other one is super dark. However, with Batman, we did have the Tim Burton movies in the middle there to bridge the gap between the two, where it was like kind of dark but still had campy elements to it. So the change for Batman has been more gradual over a period of years. So people have gotten used to it. But with Superman, there was nothing in the middle there to bridge that gap. We just went from campy to super dark. And I think that's why a lot of fans just said this isn't the way a Superman movie should be. Could you imagine if Christopher Nolan made his Dark Knight movies without having the 90s Batman movies as a base? If it just went straight from the Adam West TV show into the Dark Knight? How would people react? Probably exactly the same way they have to Man of Steel. To steal a metaphor from Jeremy Jans, we're like goldfish. When you buy a new goldfish, you don't just chuck them straight in the tank. You have to let that plastic bag float in the tank for a few minutes, so the temperature of the water in the bag and the temperature of the water in the tank can even out, the fish can get acclimatized, and then you release the fish into the tank. See, the Batman franchise was able to do that, but Man of Steel didn't have that luxury. Zack Snyder had no choice but to throw us straight in the tank, and as a result, some of us went into shock. But I'll say it, this was the best possible version of a Superman reboot that anyone could have made. Sure, it does have a few problems here or there, but there was so much heavy lifting they had to do to get Superman off the ground again, and also to be a foundation of a whole new DC cinematic universe, and it has succeeded in putting Superman back in the spotlight again. Hell, the rumors for the Batman Superman movie have totally flooded out any of the Avengers Age of Ultron rumors, so it must have done something right. When the Death of Superman comic was released, it was met with a wide range of emotion from its audience. Some people loved it, some people hated it, some people even sent death threats to the writers, but ultimately it spawned a whole new era in the comics because the status quo had been broken. Because before that comic, everyone had a preconception that Superman will always save the day and that everyone will be alright. But this comic showed them the one thing that they never thought they would see: Superman defeated. It set the stage from that moment on that anything was possible. And in the long run, that story had an overwhelmingly positive effect on the Superman character. Man of Steel also broke the status quo, and that's why I believe that in the long run, as long as they learn from their mistakes, that in time Man of Steel will be looked back on as an overwhelmingly positive thing for the character and for the future of the DCU. Maybe? And when we add up all of the evidence that we have gathered on Man of Steel, I believe that the evidence speaks for itself, and that the final verdict on Man of Steel is innocent! Innocent of the crime of being a badly made film. This was an awesome movie, and even though I know a lot of people are still going to hate it, I hope that this video has at least proved that Man of Steel is not bad, just different. Wait! Hang on, there's a few minor nitpicks that people have that are pretty much irrelevant, but I know that a lot of Man of Steel haters are going to attack me if I don't include them. So I'm going to throw them out rapid fire style and try to cover them all in 60 seconds. Ready? Go! Why was Superman's suit waiting for him in the ship when that was 20,000 years old? Obviously it was part of the hologram JorEl program, so it was being made when they were walking around and talking in the ship. All of the Jesus imagery was too much. Who cares? It's part of the Superman character now, deal with it. Besides, Superman was created by a Jewish guy and even he doesn't complain about it, so shut up! What's with the subplot about JorEl wanting Krypton to be rebuilt on Earth? Yes, I agree, that's stupid, they should have just left that out. I mean, come on, David Goyer. It's only mentioned once in the entire movie and then it's dropped completely. What was the point of even having that? Why did Zod's mask come off in one explosion when Feora's took about 100? It didn't, she only took one direct hit in the face, which is what took her mask out. And Zod had a gas station explode in his face that would have destroyed his mask a lot faster. Why was Lois Lane in the military plane? Because she's the only one that JorEl showed how to stick the thing in the thing to make thing work. And yes, it's true that she couldn't even do that, right? But hey, you know what? At least she actually did something. She didn't just sit in a chair and let herself to get blown up like Rachel Dawes did in your precious little Dark Knight. Guess what? Dark Knight has plot holes in it too, okay? Why would Batman have to accept the blame for Harvey Dent's crimes when they could have just said that the Joker did it? He killed like 50 people at that point. And what about Avengers, huh? How come Thor can fly through the glass of the prison thing when he couldn't even break through it with his hammer? And if you need the Tesseract to open a portal, how did Loki come through at the start there, through a portal, in order to get the Tesseract? And why did Thanos give Loki an army that could be taken out Phantom Menace style when the the mothership was blown up. That's a pretty big design flaw. It's kind of like the Death Star. Why would the rebels need to launch a full-on attack to destroy the Death Star when it just tractors in any ship that flies past it? Load the Millennium Falcon with explosives, let them tractor it inside, and then blow it up. Or better yet, have Luke like floating out in space, like near the exhaust port in like a spacesuit, and just shove a grenade manually down the hole. Never mind about flying at crazy speeds through this trench thing that's lined with guns. That's suicide. And another thing,